My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. In this sacred space, I'm surrounded by portraits of extraordinary American presidents. Thomas Jefferson wrote the immortal words that guide this nation. George Washington, who showed us presidents are not kings. Abraham Lincoln, who implored us to reject malice. Franklin Roosevelt, who inspired us to reject fear. I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think is more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. We can never forget that. And I never have. I've made it clear that I believe America is at an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine our fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. America's going to have to choose between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, between unity and division. We have to decide, do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? In this moment, we can see those we disagree with not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. Can we do that? Does character in public life still matter? I believe I know the answer to these questions because I know you, the American people. And I know this, we are a great nation because we are good people. When you elected me to this office, I promised to always level with you, to tell you the truth. And the truth, the sacred cause of this country is larger than any one of us. And those of us who cherish that cause, cherish it so much, a cause of American democracy itself, must unite to protect it. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy. I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose. I'll keep calling out hate and extremism. Make it clear there is no place in America for political violence or any violence ever, period. I'm going to keep speaking out to protect our kids from gun violence, our planet from climate crisis that is the existential threat. And I will keep fighting for my cancer moonshot so we can end cancer as we know it, because we can do it. And I'm going to call for Supreme Court reform because this is critical to our democracy, Supreme Court reform. You know, I will keep working to ensure America remains strong and secure and the leader of the free world. I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world. We'll keep rallying a coalition of proud nations to stop Putin from taking over Ukraine and doing more damage. We'll keep NATO stronger, and I'll make it more powerful and more united than any time in all of our history. I'll keep doing the same for our allies in the Pacific. You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore. And I'm going to keep working to end the war in Gaza, bring home all the hostages, and bring peace and security to the Middle East and end this war. We're also working around the clock to bring home Americans being unjustly detained all around the world. You know, we've come so far since my inauguration. On that day, I told you, as I stood in that winter, we stood in a winter of peril and a winter of possibilities. Peril and possibilities. We were in the grip of the worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. But we came together as Americans, and we got through it. We emerged stronger, more prosperous, and more secure. Today we have the strongest economy in the world, creating nearly 16 million new jobs, a record. Wages are up. Inflation continues to come down. The racial wealth gap is the lowest it's been in 20 years. We're literally rebuilding our entire nation, urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities. Manufacturing has come back to America. We're leading the world again in chips and science and innovation. We finally beat Big Pharma after all these years to lower the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure we lower the cost for everyone, not just seniors. More people have health care today in America than ever before. And I signed one of the most significant laws helping millions of veterans and their families who are exposed to toxic materials. You know, the most significant climate law ever in the history of the world. The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office. I've kept my commitment to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. I also kept my commitment to have an administration that looks like America and be a president for all Americans. That's what I've done. I ran for president 4 years ago because I believed and still do that the soul of America was at stake. The very nature of who we are was at stake. And that's still the case. America's an idea. An idea stronger than any army, bigger than any ocean, more powerful than any dictator or tyrant. It's the most powerful idea in the history of the world. That idea is that we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We've never fully lived up to it, to this sacred idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I do not believe the American people will walk away from it now. In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people. When you make that choice, remember the words of Benjamin Franklin hanging on my wall here in the Oval Office, alongside the busts of Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Cesar Chavez. When Ben Franklin was asked, as he emerged from the convention going on, whether the founders have given America a monarchy or republic, Franklin's response was, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it. Whether we keep our republic is now in your hands. My fellow Americans, it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years. Nowhere else on earth could a kid with a stutter, from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, one day sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. But here I am. That's what's so special about America. We're a nation of promise and possibilities, of dreamers and doers, of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. I've given my heart and my soul to our nation, like so many others. I've been blessed a million times in return with the love and support of the American people. I hope you have some idea how grateful I am to all of you. The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. We just have to keep faith, keep the faith. And remember who we are. We're the United States of America. And there's simply nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So let's act together, preserve our democracy. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
President Joe Biden addressing the nation from the Oval Office. A very good evening to you. Welcome to America at a Crossroads. I'm Larry Mantle, the host of Air Talk, a daily interview call-in program on NPR member station LAist 89.3. I have the honor and privilege of being able to moderate quite a regular number of these important programs. And tonight I'm looking forward to talking with our very special guest and getting his response to what we just heard from President Biden, about a 12-minute long speech. He's just recovered from COVID, recently tested negative. We heard his rather soft voice, a bit of seeming frailty as he spoke tonight, calling for the nation to come together, saying there's no place for political violence or any violence in the country, and touting his record during his 4 years in office. We thank you for joining us, and I just want to begin because we are starting so late with our conversation this evening that unfortunately we are not going to be able to take audience questions tonight. I'm sorry, we have so much to cover with a Congress member that we will not be able to do that tonight. But of course, next week we return to our customary format. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff represents a district centered in Burbank, Glendale, and portions of Los Angeles. He was first elected to the House in 2001. Prior to that, he served as a California state senator. Now, of course, he's running for the U.S. Senate against Republican Steve Garvey. And for the purposes of time economy, I won't go into his further record, such as prosecuting the impeachment case against former President Trump, all his important committee assignments. He does need to leave, more than likely to take a vote later in the hour, so he may have to even interrupt me mid-question, and that's fine because he needs to cast an important vote. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you for joining us this evening on America at a Crossroads.
Thanks, Larry. It's great to be with you.
Let's begin with your response. You had called for the president to step aside in his reelection bid just days before he made the decision to do so last Sunday. Your thoughts about seeing him this evening and make this speech to the nation?
Well, when I spoke to this issue a couple of weeks ago, I urged the president to make an informed judgment about whether it was time to pass the torch. And I expressed the confidence then that Joe Biden would do what he's always done, which is put the best interest of the country first. And that's exactly what he's done. And watching it tonight was, moving. It can't help but be a little bit sad because he's such a good and decent person, and it had the feeling of kind of a swan song, but an historic evening in an era where there is so little self-sacrifice or selflessness in politics, where we've seen some of the most craven exhibitions of ambition. To see a president set an example like this for the nation, to voluntarily step away from power, rare feat in American history, and I had the sense of what a good and decent human being, what a great president he has been and will continue to be through the remaining months of this year. And I just found it very moving.
You think he should consider stepping aside for Vice President Harris for a portion of the remainder of his term, or do you have confidence he's okay to finish it out?
Absolutely not in terms of stepping aside. He's doing a phenomenal job as president. He has accomplished more in his 3.5 years than most presidents do in 8 years. I want him to continue that work. There is a lot of unfinished business on his plate, as he described, and I have every confidence in his ability to do that and provide that steady hand until the torch is fully passed to the next generation, as I hope and believe it will be with Vice President Harris.
The president said tonight in his speech, nothing can come in the way of protecting democracy. And this has been central to Democrats' argument in this presidential campaign that re-electing President Trump, or former President Trump, the argument goes, threatens democracy, that he essentially is a walking coup if he's re-elected to office. And yet, despite that, we saw leading Democrats and people on the president's team who were not seemingly straight about the president's condition. We as a nation had to discover it for ourselves in that debate. And so if democracy is paramount, if for Democrats putting the strongest possible candidate up to defeat former President Trump because of the threat that he possesses in their view, then how could the people who were aware of the president's condition and the challenge he would have campaigning on his behalf, how could they not have been more forthcoming?
Well, I talked to one very close advisor of the president's before I made my comments public to do so as a courtesy to the White House. And I think they genuinely believed, and not without basis, that he was doing a great job, could continue to do a great job. They had confidence in his campaign. And I think sometimes when you're in the middle of a campaign, it's hard to be objective. It's hard to look at the polls with some distance. I had urged that the White House do so, that it consult with outside advisors they respected, that it consult with pollsters. This was, I think, about winning the election. That is, could the president prosecute the case against Donald Trump with the necessary vigor? They felt that he could, up until the president decided that he was better off passing the torch. I felt differently, obviously, but I understand that this was a very difficult decision.
There was the big article that came out with people who'd recently met with the president who expressed concerns about his memory, about his ability to stay focused in meetings. And Democrats fell all over themselves. Leading Democrats say, this was a partisan hit job. How could this have been published? This is all a bunch of lies. And then we saw the debate. So what does that do to the credibility of Democratic leaders when they say, oh, this is all lies and fake news, when then we see for ourselves shortly after that article comes out that this was not made up?
Well, if it's the article that I'm thinking of, Larry, that was an article that quoted such luminaries as Kevin McCarthy and also an unnamed source. And frankly, what they disclosed in terms of the sourcing was very, very thin, and I didn't find it credible. I've had
but what they said was, pardon me, Congressman, but what they said was actually in those quotes far more accurate than what we were being told by the Democratic Party about the president.
Well, what they reported was from obviously partisan interested people like Kevin McCarthy, who had no more insight into the president over the last 6 months than anyone else at a distance from the White House. So I didn't find it credible. And Larry, I can only judge on the basis of what I've seen in the meetings with the president that I had with him. Now, they were not in-depth meetings, but they were periodic meetings. I did not see what I saw on the debate stage. And so that did come as a rude awakening for me, and I think it did for many in the country. But I don't want to cast aspersions on the president's staff without knowing more about what he was demonstrating privately. And I found that article, if you go back and look at it, and the sources that they're willing to quote on the record, and others, the large body of them, I think, were anonymous. For the accusation they leveled, I think they needed to do a lot better than that.
Congressmember, let's talk about the Washington Post editorial board, which called for a brief contested nomination process to expose a range of candidates to Democratic voters so that there could be the choice of the strongest possible candidate, not just acclimating the vice president as the party's nominee. And, what was the rationale for rallying immediately behind the vice president instead of doing a short process, everybody make their case, and the party choosing the strongest candidate in this election?
Well, in this case, as I expected might be the case, the President of the United States had something to say about who he thought the torch should be passed to. He made a strong endorsement of the vice president. And then very quickly, other potential contenders said they were behind her. And I think it was the strength of her candidacy more than anything else that caused other, would-be contenders to say, I'm supporting the vice president. And much as some would have liked an open convention or a competitive process, if people decide they're not going to run, they're deciding they're not going to run. You can't force them to run. So I think what took place after the president's announcement and with the president's blessing was a demonstration of the strength of support for the vice president. And that's why ranks were consolidated so quickly. I also think, Larry, that there was some concern in the party about, would it be an ugly, bitter fight? Would it devolve into, various ugly, divisive issues? And I think, from the top to the bottom of the Democratic Party, people decided to be very pragmatic. And no, we're better off uniting around someone. We've had a lot of division, leading up to this moment. And what the party really needs is to come together behind someone we think is the strongest nominee. And we did.
And looking at this point, time was so short that as a practical matter, it's understandable that for anyone else to be able to be properly vetted, introduce themselves to the electorate and all, as opposed to the vice president, might have just been too daunting a task. But this kind of gets back to that earlier issue I was raising. Had there been pressure earlier on the president to strongly reconsider his reelection run, there could have been a chance to really have the time to bring out a whole lot. I mean, there's a very deep bench in the Democratic Party. I think even Republicans would agree with that. There's a lot of talent standing by in gubernatorial offices and elsewhere who could have made their case. Perhaps the vice president is the strongest candidate, but as 4 years ago, at that point, she was not a particularly strong campaigner. She might be much stronger now, and of course, has much experience that she's able to bring to the campaign trail. But again, wouldn't the party be in a better position had this whole process happened months ago instead of at the last minute?
Well, first of all, the president was determined to run for re-election. The president has been a magnificent president. He has an extraordinary record of accomplishment. And until people watched that debate, myself included, there just wasn't any impetus to change nominees when the president was doing such an extraordinary job. I'm frankly proud of the party that when it saw that there needed to be a different candidate or would be a stronger candidate than the vice president, that we moved to get behind that stronger candidate and that we had a president willing to pass the torch. By the same token, Larry, the contrast couldn't be sharper in a Republican Party in which their nominee, their presumed nominee at the time, was convicted of 34 felonies. They decided they were going to stick with the convicted felon. Time after time, he's demonstrated his unfitness for office. And they are lining up like lemmings behind this criminal. So as between those two parties and those two pathways, and the decisions that their party leaders made, one in Joe Biden of selflessness, one in Donald Trump of ultimate selfishness and malignant narcissism, I'm going to go with the Democratic Party every time.
Congressman, let's talk about the excitement in the party right now for the candidacy of Vice President Harris, because there, at least at this moment, seems to be a great deal of unity, great enthusiasm for her. What does she need to do as a candidate? Because I think a lot of this enthusiasm, part of it is that President Biden has stepped aside, and people are relieved, and there's an excitement about that. As much as they appreciate the president, this brings in a younger person to run. But what does she have to do to really make more of this enthusiasm about her, more of this her own?
Well, first of all, given how well she's done since she was named by the president as his chosen, successor in terms of the party leadership, I'd say keep doing what you're doing. I mean, the outpouring of support for her has been phenomenal, and it has taken the form of just overwhelming grassroots support and small dollar contributions. It's taken the form of tens of thousands of people already signing up to volunteer for her campaign. It's taken the form of excitement among young people. Larry, I always felt that this election was going to be decided by young people, which was frankly something that had been concerning me, and decided in one of two ways. It would be decided by young people staying home or young people turning out. Now, it certainly looks like young people are going to turn out, and they may turn out in droves. So she's going to have to continue making the case. She has the primary spotlight now. She's carrying a very heavy burden. I think she is more than up to the challenge. She goes into this race, with the experience of a vice president, U.S. senator, attorney general, prosecutor. And in this matchup between this former prosecutor and this current felon, that's a really good matchup for the Democratic Party. I have every confidence that she is going to press the case. She has already played a huge leadership role for the administration in being a champion of reproductive freedom. I think her candidacy elevates that vital issue and freedom even higher. And I think she is going to excite a whole new generation of people. So I'd say, first of all, keep doing what you're doing. She is going to have to, be able to bear that burden, that responsibility, as well as that opportunity. And thus far, all the signs are positive.
It's often observed that how many young people vote is key for the Democratic Party, but also suburban women have decided recent elections. They supported former President Trump 8 years ago. They supported President Biden 4 years ago. The question is, how are they going to break in this election? And I wonder with Vice President Harris, you mentioned reproductive rights is going to be a central focus, but you probably observe with suburban women that there are nuanced views about abortion and about what, if any, restrictions would be on abortions. So, I mean, is that an area where the vice president also has to be somewhat nuanced in the messaging she gives, or can she just go full bore about reproductive rights, no limits, just go full bore on that?
I don't think she has to be nuanced about this. I think she needs to continue what she's been doing around the country since the Dobbs decision, and that is making the case that women should have control of their own bodies, period. And so I think she is making that case powerfully, but not just that case. And if you look at what her top messages are coming right out of the chute here, it is not only reproductive freedom, but it's also democracy and the economy. And I think those are also core issues for voters. She is well aware of the work that we need to continue doing to make the economy work for people. That is a core part of her message. But as this former prosecutor, someone who has upheld the law against this serial lawbreaker who incited a violent attack on the Capitol, she's also making the defense of democracy a key issue. You heard tonight in the president's words how much Joe Biden is animated by that issue. Indeed, I think what ultimately caused the president to decide to pass the torch was that the risk of another Trump presidency to our democracy, to our standing in the world, to our rights and freedoms, to everything the country stands for, is at such grave peril that he absolutely had to go with whoever he thought was best to make out that case. And ultimately, he decided that was Kamala Harris. And I think he was right in that judgment.
You have to be pretty impressed with the fundraising that's happened in the first 48 hours. And you yourself are a prodigious fundraiser, so you know what goes into this. But the haul she's made has been extraordinary.
It's been incredible, within, I think, less than 48 hours to raise $100 million in small dollar contributions. I did a couple requests of my supporters. We raised 130,000 practically overnight. So, she will have the resources that she needs. Some of that, some of those resources had begun to dry up prior to her being our presumptive nominee. So this is an exciting infusion of resources, but also so many of those small givers are first-time givers. These are people who have not been politically engaged before. And I think that's also very telling that she's generating new interest, so important for the party.
Today, we had, of course, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to a joint session of Congress, and I want to come back to that in a moment. But speaking of the vice president's efforts to reach out to younger voters, of course, there is a generational divide, even among American Jews, on Israel and how the war has been conducted in Gaza. So I wonder, how much difference do you think we're going to see in the rhetoric as well as potential policies toward Israel from a potential President Harris versus President Biden?
Well, I think there'll be one very important similarity. There may be a great many similarities, and if I had to guess, it will be a continuity of a lot of the policies we've seen from President Biden. But the most fundamental similarity is, I think Joe Biden has approached this conflict by trying to determine what's the right thing to do. What's the right thing to do to help Israel protect itself, to help protect civilian life in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to bring about a regional peace that can be a lasting peace. What is the right approach for the United States to take here? And then I'm going to worry about the politics of it later. I admire that about Joe Biden. I don't know that other presidents would have approached it the same way. In week one of the war, when it was widely presumed that Israel had bombed a hospital in Gaza, as it turned out, it was Islamic Jihad that had bombed the hospital. Different presidents would have said, I'm canceling my planned trip to Israel. After all, Arab leaders were already backing out of that meetings with the president. But no, Joe Biden went. He feels this deeply in his bones. I think the same is true of Kamala Harris. I think she'll be a very strong supporter of Israel, but I think she will not shy away from letting, Bibi Netanyahu know where she believes that his policies are not helping resolve either the conflict or bring about a lasting peace in the region.
Well, we saw Majority Leader of the Senate a few months ago, Chuck Schumer, say that Israeli voters should consider a change in their prime minister. And that created a backlash from some and others who said, right on, that you're expressing the view that many American Jews hold as well. And I wonder, could you see during this campaign, or if she's elected president, Kamala Harris making a similar kind of a statement like that? Or is it a very different thing with a candidate for president than the Senate Majority Leader to say something like that?
I think it's probably different for a candidate for president. I don't want to speak for the vice president, but I have the same deep concern about the prime minister that Leader Schumer does. I did not make the same call, however. I've been loath to express opinions about how I think fellow democracies should decide their elections, but I have not been a bit shy about pointing out disagreements that I have with the prime minister, and the most fundamental of which is my support for a two-state solution and my conviction that what is in the long-term best interests of Israel is a regional peace in which Saudi Arabia recognizes Israel, in which Israel recognizes a Palestinian state. I think that is the path to a durable peace. That is, at least at the moment, clearly not where Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming from. And I think that the president and the vice president should continue making every effort to bring about this ceasefire that does not involve Hamas playing any future role in the governance of Gaza, but does bring those hostages home and create the conditions in which there might be a lasting and regional peace.
Did you attend the joint session address by Bibi Netanyahu today?
I did. I mean, notwithstanding my strong differences with the prime minister, I haven't boycotted any, head of state speaking to the Congress. Really, out of my feeling that this is a state-to-state relationship between the U.S. and Israel, and just as I would not have Israelis abandon the United States when Donald Trump was president, I don't feel Americans should abandon Israel when Netanyahu is the prime minister. I understand and respect those who decided not to attend, but my view was I was going to attend out of respect for the state-to-state relationship.
What did you think of his address?
Disappointed, perhaps not surprised, but disappointed because there was so little discussion of, what the day after would look like. So little vision, I thought, for what comes after this war. I was also hoping, although not expecting, that maybe there would be a breakthrough with a ceasefire prior to his visit that he might announce to the Congress. There was plenty to agree about in terms of the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship, in terms of the horrible butchery of Hamas on October 7th, and a lot of the brave IDF soldiers who are risking their lives, losing their lives to protect Israel. But I was certainly hoping that there might be more about what might come next to give people in the United States and around the world more hope for what an outcome might be.
Wanted to ask you about your U.S. Senate campaign and some of the issues that you think are most critical for California voters to be considering. What are the top two couple of issues on which you're centering your campaign?
Well, I would say, most particularly making the economy work for everyone. The challenge today is not that people aren't working, unemployment is very low. The challenge is that people are working and many are just struggling to get by. They can't afford a place to live. They can't afford childcare. And this is something that was true well before inflation. Inflation has aggravated it, but this is a trend that has been decades in the making. And I think it's deeply intertwined with a threat to our democracy. When people start to feel that the quality of life that their parents enjoyed was better than what they have, or they look at the future for their kids and it's in doubt, they start to entertain any demagogue who comes along promising to fix everything. Just to give you, kind of a concrete illustration, Larry, I was talking to a young woman in the north of the state. She was probably in about her mid-30s. She said, I did everything I was supposed to do. I was told, go to college, get a good education, and I did. Got a lot of good student loans along with it. I've been paying off those loans for 10 years. My rent keeps going up. I have nothing set aside for the future, and I have nothing to set aside. I have health care, but it's not a particularly great policy. I'm scared of what would happen if I got sick. I live alone. There's nobody to help me with any of this, and I'm terrified. She had tears in her eyes. She was terrified. And I think she's speaking for millions of people, and not so, not just young, but millions of seniors too who are on the edge of retirement, can't afford to retire. These, to me, are core issues, probably most specifically housing and homelessness, but also childcare. People can't join the workforce because they can't afford childcare. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for so many folks who can't join the economy, particularly women of color. Those twin issues, housing and childcare, are really core issues that I'm focused on.
And of course, from Republican perspective, their response is that much of what you're describing of this economic malaise and pain is the result of Democratic policies, specifically all the money that was paid out to people all over the place for COVID, whether they needed the money or not, that overheated the economy. Prices went up. There was inflation as a result of that the Biden administration's policies that they see as hostile to the oil industry has been part of what's led gasoline prices to be so high, that all of these factors really have their roots in poor democratic economic policies. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's what they say, but none of that is true. what would we have with the Republican policies? During the pandemic, when people couldn't afford their rent, they would have become homeless. During the pandemic, when businesses couldn't keep their doors open, they wouldn't have provided emergency loans or helped the small businesses. They would have gone under. The economy would have crashed even more than it did under Donald Trump. We wouldn't have had the recovery that we've had. We wouldn't have a lower inflation rate than just about any other developed country around the world. So their policies would have been utterly disastrous, as indeed the Republican handling of the pandemic was disastrous. Nevertheless, there was so much more that needs to be done, and we have done a great deal to address these very issues with bringing manufacturing back, as the president was talking about with Chips and Sciences, with attacking climate change with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But here's the thing, we could have done a lot more, but for Republican obstructionism. This is their playbook, Larry. It's always been their playbook, and that is stop Democrats from getting anything done if they possibly can, and then attack Democrats for not getting anything done. If you look at what's gone on in the House in the last 2 years, while Republicans have controlled the House, they have done nothing productive. They can't even agree among themselves. Last week, sort of a highlight of the legislative week for the Republicans was passing a bill to free the refrigerators. And not content with saving that appliance, they had a dishwasher protection act, basically bills that would allow refrigerators to be more energy wasteful and dishwashers more water wasteful. This is what they're doing. Of course, it's going nowhere. But if there's ever been a party in modern history that's made the case for its own replacement, it's the Republican Party, the do-nothing party, the party of a convicted felon. That's their record.
Let's talk about immigration, because that, of course, is a huge issue in California, as it's become in other parts of the country. And this has become fraught for Democrats because the composition of those seeking asylum and who've showed up at the border has changed dramatically. We have many more families, people coming from a wide range of countries seeking entry into the United States. And that's created political pressures for Democrats around the country, and not just from Republican criticism. So what do you see as an effective immigration policy for the country going forward that deals with these massive requests for asylum and the challenge with the system being able to handle that?
I really don't think it's rocket science in terms of what we need to do. The difficulty is less conceiving the solutions than getting them through a Congress in which one party simply wants to demagogue on the issue. We're going to have to beef up resources at the border. We're going to have more immigration judges. We're going to have to process asylum claims much more expeditiously. It doesn't do any good for people to come here seeking asylum, have to wait years to be adjudicated, and then for a court to decide they don't qualify because they're economic refugees and be sent back. That's a terrible system. We don't also want to separate children from their families at the border. We need to do a lot more to discourage these waves of migration by addressing conditions in the home countries. We know what we need to do. There have been some good faith efforts to do it. We also need to provide relief for dreamers. We need to provide a pathway to citizenship for people who are undocumented in this country, including a lot of people putting food on our table like farm workers. We know what we need to do. The last Republican who was really interested in trying to do something was George W. Bush. That was short-lived. Now, when you had people working in a bipartisan basis in the Senate on an immigration package, which frankly I thought was too weighted to enforcement without any pathway for dreamers or other folks who are in the country undocumented. Nevertheless, Trump killed it. Got his enablers and his minions in the Congress to kill it. They don't want to solve this problem. They want to campaign and demagogue on this problem. They want to demonize all immigrants and migrants, notwithstanding incredible contributions they've made to this country. So to me, priority number one, challenge number one, if we're truly going to get this done, I think Democrats are going to have to do it ourselves. It will mean either carving out or doing away with the filibuster, but I just don't see Republicans meaningfully deciding they want to try to accomplish something to address this challenge.
I just want to remind viewers that Congressman Schiff might have to leave before 6 o'clock in case he's called in for a vote. So he's just, whenever that happens, he'll just let us know and he'll dash. We're going to continue with the program after that, though. So please don't go anywhere, but just want to alert you that he may have to abruptly leave to make that vote, which of course is important for him to be able to do so. What is it you're going to be voting on, Congressman?
Well, this is a continuation of sort of the do nothing House of Representatives. We're taking up appropriations bills tonight and innumerable amendments on those appropriation bills that, some of the Republicans are voting down their own members' amendments. None of these bills are going to become law, and they know it because they're filled with these poison pills. So essentially, we're going to do another fire drill tonight, but I need to be there to cast my vote in the fire drill.
All right. What other issues do you see as...
Larry, if you could hold on one sec. Okay. I've been given notice that votes have been called. So I'm going to need, speaking of fire drills, need to make this the last question.
Okay. Other priority for the country that you think we really need to focus on?
Well, I think within the rubric of making the economy work for everyone, we need to address the changing nature of work. Through globalization, through automation, and increasingly through AI, the workplace has been transformed, and we haven't kept up with it. And as a result, so many Americans don't have a reliable retirement. They have very unequal access to healthcare. I think making healthcare universal and affordable and accessible, also having a structure for retirement that travels with you wherever you may work. If you're working for one employer or you're working for three in the same day, I think these are also really important structural reforms that we need to make. But let me just get back to the threshold issue, and that is we have all spent our lives living in a world which was ever increasing in its freedoms. We've had the great good fortune to see new democracies being born and walls coming down. And we find ourselves very unexpectedly at a moment when democracy is at great risk around the world, with a militant Russia invading its neighbor and trying to remake the map of Europe by force for the first time since World War II. And we see our freedoms receding here at home. And that danger to our democracy at home, and we didn't really get a chance to discuss this, was made immeasurably worse by that Supreme Court decision granting the President of the United States, any president, immunity from committing crimes while in office. Justice Sotomayor was exactly right when she wrote that this new immunity lies about like a loaded weapon. That decision, that shocking, unconscionable decision to which Justice Roberts put his name, has fundamentally altered the balance of power. And we dare not have an occupant in the Oval Office who can abuse that immunity. We also are going to have to reform the Supreme Court. So let me just end with what I think we need to do to the Supreme Court, or with the Supreme Court, and that is, I think we need to expand it to rebalance it, something I never would have advocated before Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump stacked the court by depriving Barack Obama of an appointment and jamming others down the country's throat while they were voting for Joe Biden. We need to term limit the court, and we need an enforceable code of ethics for the court. And those reforms, I think, ought to be a very high priority. I know President Biden will be speaking this soon, and I hope he embraces some or all of those reforms. Larry, thank you for inviting me. Thank you to JUDH for this incredible community, such a vital resource, and I wish you all a good night.
Thank you so much, Congressman Adam Schiff. We appreciate it very much. And as the Congressman was just saying, thousands of people every week coming together for these programs, extraordinary guests, leading thinkers, academics, elected officials, people running for office, the range of conversations is extraordinary. And I'm so glad that we get to continue these week in and week out. I don't think anyone would have guessed early on in the pandemic that what began as this series would continue all these years later with ever larger audiences. Joining me now is, of course, one of the leaders of Jews United for Democracy and Justice, a friend of mine for many years, longtime Los Angeles County Supervisor. Prior to that, longtime Los Angeles City Council member, I think 20 years in each of those positions. Every time I go to the Hollywood Bowl, I see his name up there for the entry court that's named for Zev because of his support for the arts in LA County and specifically for the bowl. Zev, thanks for coming on and rounding out the hour with our conversation. We appreciate it. So I wanted to ask you about Ukraine specifically, because we have in Donald Trump and now with J.D. Vance as his running mate, particularly Vance has been quite clear about his position on U.S. support for Ukraine. So, contrast what you think would happen between the two administrations.
Well, I think this is really one of the most important issues. Foreign policy doesn't tend to be an important issue in a presidential election, typically. But this one really ranks very high. This is about the worldview of what America's role on the planet Earth is. Ukraine is kind of a canary in the coal mine. Putin invaded Ukraine twice, once in 2014 and then once again 2 or 3 years ago. And he's made it very clear. Ukraine has to be part of Russia. It's always, he says it's been part of Russia for 1,000 years. It may have been a part of Russia for 1,000 years, but not always with their acquiescence. My parents came from Ukraine, so I've been to Ukraine many times. I was an observer to the 2004 presidential election in Ukraine. So I don't know it like a lot of our guests do, but this is a canary in the coal mine. He's not going to stop with Ukraine. He's got his eyes on the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. He's got his eyes on Poland, and it was Ronald Reagan who had the line. I don't know if he was the first one to have it, but peace through strength. And when we've got to show that we're willing to, especially through NATO, to preserve and expand and strengthen NATO, which Biden has done without a doubt. And you contrast that with the Trump worldview, which is NATO is not that important and it's expendable. And our commitment to being part of that coalition of countries to preserve democracy in Europe, that's not essential. J.D. Vance actually is quoted as saying, and I actually saw the video, something to the effect, Ukraine doesn't mean anything to me. Well, it ought to mean something to him. It ought to mean something to all of us. We have been, in the last century, we were brought into 2 major world wars, largely because of what was going on in Europe. Of course, World War II also in the Pacific. But it started with World War I and then World War II in Europe. We can't isolate ourselves from what happens in the rest of the world. So when Zelensky says, and when Biden says, and when a lot of other foreign policy advocates, experts say, that it is in our national interests to ensure that Putin doesn't steamroll Ukraine, they know what they're talking about.
But let me ask you about what former President Trump says. At the Republican convention last week, he said, Putin didn't invade Ukraine on my watch. He invaded Crimea when Barack Obama was president, and he went after the rest of the country with Joe Biden in office. But you'll notice he didn't mess with Ukraine while I was president. So his statement is, he projects the kinds of strength that's really going to keep Putin from attempting to encroach on all these territories that you just named. What's your response to that?
Well, my response to it is very simple. Putin, Trump is a lapdog for Putin. He didn't need to invade Ukraine. He was trying to undermine the Ukrainian democracy through fixing elections and undermining elections. And And this has nothing to do with strength. Let me put it another way. If Putin thought that Biden was going to be weak and took advantage of the quote unquote weak moment in this geopolitical puzzle, he sure miscalculated, didn't he? Because Putin thought he was going to take over Kiev in a matter of days. He thought he was going to take over Ukraine in a matter of weeks. He didn't think there would be any resistance. It was our country and our foreign policy that and the President Biden who brought the coalition, the NATO coalition, together to stand up to him. And I think, I mean, if he's got a half a brain in his head, and I suspect he has at least a half a brain in his head, Putin, if he had to do it over again, I'm not sure he would have launched that attack 2 or 3 years ago, because he's lost tens of thousands of soldiers dead, hundreds of thousands wounded. It's been a horrible strategic mistake on their part. So if he had done this on Trump's watch, Trump would have gone to Mar-a-Lago and played another round of golf. I mean, I hate to be so crass and partisan about it, but I don't think President Trump, former President Trump, really understands foreign policy, understands what the risks are, what the stakes are.
Let me ask you, since we're talking foreign policy, if what would you ideally like to see in a Harris administration, if she's elected president, in her posture towards Israel? What do you think would balance the criticism that many American Jews have for how Netanyahu is leading the country, how he's prosecuting the war, but also with the U.S.'s deep and long time link and commitment to Israel? How would you balance that? And how do you think that administration should, if it becomes the presidency?
Well, I think the first thing that has to happen is there needs to be an agreement by the parties involved in this, not just Hamas and Israel, but Qatar and Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula countries. There needs to be a cessation of hostilities, and there needs to be a release of the hostages, even if it's for a short period of time. We had 2 nights ago, we had Aaron David Miller as our guest on this program. And he basically made that case that you need to buy some time to catch our breath collectively, all of the parties, and then hope that we can build on that to have some kind of a result which displaces Hamas as a functional governing body, a governing entity of Gaza, bring in some of the Arabian countries into play, and start to lay the groundwork for an eventual 2-state solution. Right now,
but can this happen with Netanyahu as prime minister?
I'm not an expert. I like to think I am, but I hesitate to say it's obviously it has not worked out very well under Netanyahu. However, let me just hasten to add that after October 7th, there aren't very many Israelis who today would bet a nickel on a 2-state solution. It is just across all political stripes, all political places on the spectrum. They do not trust the Palestinians to be able to keep the peace, and I suspect that the feeling is mutual on the other side of the border. So there's going to have to be a trust building period, and it's not going to be a short period. It's going to take some time. However, you got to take the shot, and you got to take it in short steps, and then build trust over time. If we don't do it, we know what the result's going to be. There's going to be another war, maybe even worse than this one. This happens from every 5 to 10 years, and I always tell my students at UCLA that Wayne Gretzky didn't make 100% of the shots he didn't take. You got to take some shots, calculated. I wouldn't even call them risks, calculated steps designed to lay the groundwork for long-term peace in the region. And there are some other countries in the region, Arab countries in the region, that want to be a part of that, it seems. But right now, it's on automatic pilot. And there's been, on both sides of the conflict, there have been foot dragging, political motivations. Everything is there's not a lot of morality in this spirit, not even a lot of strategic thinking.
I think that Vice President Harris, though, she's in a difficult position because she's trying to reach out to younger Democrats, particularly,
Yeah.
and to show empathy for what the Palestinians have endured with the war in Gaza, and at the same time not alienate other segments of the party and not to undermine the historic relationship between the U.S. and Israel.
Yeah.
So, it seems to me this is not an easy task to thread that needle.
No, it's not an easy task for her, and it wouldn't have been an easy task, and it hasn't been an easy task for Joe Biden. Um, and we'll just stipulate to that. But I will tell you, there's a concerted Republican attack on her that she's not pro-Israel, which is absolutely absurd. I remember the late prominent attorney in Los Angeles, Paul Zifrin, who once said to me, he said, when you run against somebody, you identify their weakness and then you exaggerate it. And that's true. That's what a lot of political campaigns.
I'm sure you never had that happen to you, Zach.
Never, of course not. No, I was perfect. Yeah, far from it. But she's, she comes from California. She comes from Northern California. She lives in Southern California. Her husband is active in the Jewish community. She understands Israel. Look, she's of a different generation than Joe Biden. Joe Biden talks of himself as he said the other day, or was quoted as an Irish Catholic Zionist. Younger generations don't identify with Israel in the same way that older generations do. I'm of an older generation now. I hate to admit it. And I see it through the lens of the 6-Day War when I was a teenager, and we thought Israel was going to go up in smoke. We were all worried about it. Jews all over the country were worried. All over the world were worried about it. It's different now, and so the language may be a little more nuanced. The language may be a little different. But when it comes to the fundamental question, does Israel have a right to exist? Which many of the protesters do not believe that Israel has the right to exist. When they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, free of what? Free of Jews. That's the way it's received in Israel, and that's the way it's received in a lot of communities, not just Jewish communities, but Christian communities. So there's that's not up for discussion with her. She will be, no president operates alone. They operate in a framework of foreign policy. She'll bring in some of the best minds, some of whom I suspect have been on our programs over the last several years. So I'm not worried about her position on Israel. And Larry, you don't know this about me, but in 1972, I was in charge of the Jewish campaign in California for George McGovern against Richard Nixon. And Nixon made a huge effort to get Jewish votes by promising the world and by demonizing George McGovern at the time. There was a lot of exaggeration there. I've been through this for now over 50 years. Every time there's an election, the Republicans will try to tar the Democratic candidate. They couldn't do it with Biden, although Biden has come under some criticism in recent months because he has tried to put some pressure on the Netanyahu government to cooperate for.
But of course, more of the criticism of Biden has come from members of his own party
and some of the America Firsters in the Republican Party who are in the minority, but they're loud. We've been through that. I mean, one of the reasons there was a holdup in the budget allocation, the appropriations bill for the $14 billion appropriations bill for Israel, was that the Republicans were holding it hostage, and for a lot of other reasons. It got worked out finally, but it was up in the air for quite a while. So I think we need to, the thing that drives me crazy is when an issue like the survival of Israel, the issue like the survival of Ukraine, issues that have some implications for our national security and beyond, that they become these partisan battles, and who can score a political point at the expense of our national security. There used to be a saying that politics stops at the ocean's edge, right? And that's not the case anymore. And so this election, I think, is going to be focused a little bit more on foreign policy in a very cheap political way than maybe ever before.
Zev, thank you so much for coming out of the dugout, so to speak, and to take over the final at bat
I
for
can now
Congress
say
membership.
I can now say for the rest of my life that I pinch hit for Adam.
Yes. I appreciate it very much. Thank you,
Thanks,
because
Larry.
this is really good information. I appreciate it, and your long time efforts on behalf of Israel and international affairs like this are very meaningful. So thank you so much, Zev. We appreciate it, and thank you for joining us for this very special program again with Congressmember Adam Schiff and with Zev Yaroslavsky, and led off with President Biden with his address to the nation this evening. Thank you for supporting Jews United for Democracy and Justice, a nonprofit organization that brings you these extraordinary programs. This week, in fact, 2 of them. Aaron David Miller was on just 2 nights ago, and tonight with Congressman Adam Schiff. You can make your contribution by going to Jews United for Democracy. That's JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org, and make your tax-deductible contribution. A reminder that next Wednesday, the 31st of July, it'll be Bill Kristol and Andrew Effer of the Bulwark in conversation on the 2024 election and what comes after with Pat Morrison. That's next Wednesday, a week from tonight, 5 o'clock Pacific, America at a Crossroads. From all of us, have a very good Wednesday evening.